So there's probably been no bait that has saved more people's fishing days out there, whether you're a tournament angler or recreational angler, than a drop shot. And today what I want to talk about is the little do's and don'ts of drop shot fishing, and really I want to break down everything that I think you guys need to know about fishing a drop shot that I think you don't already know. I'm going to cover the basic stuff from how to tie a drop shot to everything where we get complicated with the different hooks, the different setups, and everything in between, and where I like to fish it and how I fish it. So this is a video you guys are not going to want to miss. It might be your day this drop shot is saving next. So let's get into it. So like I said, a drop shot has saved more people's days than probably anybody out there or any other lure out there than you can possibly imagine. We've all been in that situation, at least I can remember at least a dozen times, where you're out there fishing a crankbait on a grass line, you're out there, you know, throwing a chatterbait through some rock, you're doing any of the number of things, you're fishing offshore ledge fish, and all of a sudden they just stop biting. Or you're smashing them all practice, and then you get out there and the conditions change and it slicks right off and they just don't want to eat. Or you're even looking at them on your Panoptics and they just won't bite. And so what is the first bait we all reach for? It's a drop shot, flat out. There's probably nobody reaches for one bait more than a drop shot because it's so extremely versatile and it catches so many different sizes of fish. So the first thing that I want to talk about is how to rig a drop shot, because we're going to start from the most basic and work our way to the most complex. So if you guys already know how to tie a drop shot and whatnot, go ahead and skip forward. But for those of you guys that are new to this, we're going to break it all right down for you. And so the first step to fishing a drop shot is actually tying a drop shot up. And so there's a bunch of different hooks that you can potentially use. I like to narrow it down into 2 or 3 different hooks, but let's start with how to tie a drop shot. So I have my favorite trocar hook right here that I'm going to use for my drop shot, and the best way to do it is to tie a Palomar knot. It is the least invasive. You have to worry about cutting the least amount of lines, and it works out the best. So you just thread it through the eye, bring it back up through, so that way you have a loop right here. Then you take that loop, your hook is in the middle, you can see right there, and you tie an overhand knot, and then run your hook back through. You'll notice I keep my finger in that loop, and then I pull it tight. It's pretty simple. If you need to look up how to tie a Palomar knot, I'll do a short video on that here soon. But then the most important part of it after you tie the Palomar knot is taking your tag end that you have right here and running it back through the eye of that hook. And what that's going to do is that's going to keep your drop shot hook sitting straight out, so that way it never falls over or does anything goofy. It will always stay standing straight out, which is going to give you all of your baits, no matter what baits you run, a more natural look. And so that's super, super important. If you don't do that step, your drop shot looks really, really dumb. Or it might even be fished upside down. So always make sure you thread that line back through the eye of it. And then, of course, you put your weight on there, no matter what size. I actually pour my own weights. I actually take the little piece that they put to tie your line on upside down, and so it makes a loop. It actually has a loop on it, and I like to tie my drop shots to it. If that doesn't work for you, what you can do with the store-bought drop shots is I take the little pinch point that they have that you put your line through, and I open it up with a pair of pliers, so that way I can actually tie my drop shot to it with just a weak clinch knot, so that way it doesn't go flying off all the time and I save myself some money on drop shot weights. So there's 3 hooks that I'm going to pair a drop shot with. You have your nose hook, which is just a small nose hook. This is a TK150, I think. I'll have all this stuff linked down below as always. Sometimes the numbers elude me. But you have your typical nose rig, which is just a small, you know, you're basically the best way to describe it is a small drop shot hook. The next is I have a finesse light wire worm hook. And then the other one is going to be your typical EWG hook. And that EWG hook is going to allow you to rig it weedless. As well as that light wire worm hook is also going to allow you to rig it weedless, as you see right here. And so those are the 3 hooks that I'm going to use on a drop shot. Each have their own purpose. I like the nose hook when I'm typically smallmouth fishing. I really don't ever have an application where I'm going to want to make it weedless unless I'm fishing for smallmouth in grass, in which case you can use a small EWG hook or that light wire worm hook to weedless or Texas rig your baits, so that way they don't get caught up in the grass. That's also a super, super big tip for when you're fishing around cover for largemouth, which is when I typically use the light wire worm hook or that EWG hook. Those two pair really nicely if I'm fishing around cover for largemouth or if I'm fishing in grass for largemouth. That way I can get my bait through there as weedless as possible, so that way I can actually catch those fish and not have to worry about getting hung up on the grass. So those are the 3 hooks that I use. There's 3 different weight weight profiles that I like to use too. You have your standard cylinder drop shot weight, you have a ball style drop shot weight, and then you have a teardrop style drop shot weight. I really do not ever use the ball style drop shot weight, so this will simplify it for you easy. Throw that right out the window because you really don't need it. The cylinder drop shot weight goes through grass the best. I also think it goes through rock the best because it's the thinnest and it snakes through there a little bit better. I use the teardrop typically in a tungsten form when I'm fishing for smallmouth out deeper because I have a tungsten drop shot weight, which means it is denser but smaller. So I can get away with fishing a smaller weight and actually feel bottom better, which is what that tungsten allows me to do. That tungsten just is harder, and so it will transmit hard bottom better when I'm fishing it out on gravel or out in sand or just anywhere that I want to feel hard bottom. And so that's an important tip for when you're picking your drop shot weights. So I really only use the cylinder weight and then I use the teardrop style weight. Those are the only two that you really need. So there's basically three types of baits that I'm also going to pair with this. You have your traditional finesse style, you know, your minnow style baits. We also have a minnow style bait right here, the scented jerk shads or streaks. Those are your those are your basic profiles right there, minnow style profiles. So you have your standard worm style profile. That's like your typical largemouth bait, whether it's a small finesse worm or a standard 7-8 inch drop shot worm. It's kind of a good profile. And then you have your off the wall swim bait profile. Those are the three baits that I'm really going to break out. The finesse baits, obviously you can tell those are more for when fishing gets tough. I'm smallmouth fishing in clear water. The clearer the water, typically the smaller the profile I'll go to. Finesse swim baits are also a good profile when I'm fishing for smallmouth, but I really like to use swim baits when I'm covering water with a drop shot. So if I'm out smallmouth fishing or fishing deep water, clear water, whether it's for spotted bass, smallmouth, largemouth, etc., and I'm trying to cover water and I'm casting it and dragging it, that's going to be when I really want to utilize those swim baits, because that's going to allow me to figure out where those fish are at and get a better presentation to those fish and get a finesse swim bait down deep without having to put it on a mega sized, you know, ball head or something like that. So I also like to go to swim baits when it gets windy out. So if I found some fish when it was calm and now they really don't want to eat but they're still deep, what I can do is use that swim bait because it's going to give off more kick and those fish are going to be able to see it from further away. So that's when I like to break out the swim bait. The worm is going to be basically when I am largemouth fishing. Anytime I get into an area where I think I'm going to be catching largemouth, I always break out those finesse worms. And this pink, for some reason in the summertime and in the fall, when I'm around dirtier water largemouth, they absolutely eat the fire out of this thing. So I always have one of these worms rigged up. This is a Z-Man SMH worm. I like it a ton just because of this right here. I catch a ton of fish with it, and so that Elastec really allows me to go through less baits and save a lot of time and a lot of cash, which is something as fishermen we all absolutely love. So there's a few different ways I like to fish a drop shot. You can obviously just cast it and drag it. That's the one that people most often go with, and I do that whether I'm drift fishing up on Lake Erie or I found a school of fish and I just want to get a natural presentation. I will cast it out and just drag that bait through there. I call it the Erie drag because that's where I was born and raised. The next you can do is you can shake it. And I really don't utilize that all too much unless I'm fishing around isolated cover or I'm fishing for an isolated fish. So say I throw at a bridge piling and I want it to stay right there, I can sit there and shake that bait in place and get it the most action out of it, because for those of you who don't know this, a drop shot is the only bait that you can fish horizontal or vertically without moving it horizontally. So I can pitch at a stump and sit there and shake it on that stump. That is a super big tool around the spawn, because when it's around the spawn, those fish are really territorial about their areas. So sometimes it takes a lot of convincing to get those fish to eat, and so that's always a benefit to a drop shot around the spawn. The other way you can fish a drop shot is the pitching method, which is what I like to utilize when I am covering water for smallmouth majority of the time. That's when I'll go to that teardrop style weight, which is a heavier weight, and it's almost like you're punching or you're flipping grass, but you're just pitching a drop shot. They call it power shotting, and I will go to an oversized drop shot weight and just make casts, because the majority of the time you're getting your bites when that drop shot hits the bottom and you pick up and they're already there. And so this is where this technique really comes into play. For those of you guys that don't have a lot of forward-facing sonar and aren't looking for your fish, if you have regular 2D and side imaging, you can take this and just pitch it. all over. So if you get on a gravel bar or a hard spot and you're not sure exactly where those fish are at, you can just pitch this bait and get as many casts in as possible throughout the length of a day. And so that's when I really like to go to that. But those are the ways that I really like to fish a drop shot. So the other important thing that people really talk about all the time is the leader length that you're going to have. I always go with the standard Brandon Palaniuk response that I like to go when I tie my leader on, I reel it up until it goes into my reel, because I don't ever want to get close and go to grab that fish and have my leader not get caught in the tip of my rod. That can really end a really good fish catch. When you're fighting that fish and you get it up close and you go to grab it and your leader hits right in, or your leader knot hits right into the front guide and it stops, and obviously that's going to throw a monkey wrench into your fish landing plan. So you really don't ever want to do that, and so that's why I just typically reel it to where it's about twice the rod tip length. That usually is a good go-to. If you're fishing grass for largemouth, you can obviously go really short if you wanted to, but that 2 times the rod length has never really led me astray. You know, that way if I'm covering water and I'm going through a lot of weights and I'm having to trim it down, then my leader has a little buffer there, so I don't have to retie a new leader on there every time, because that's something that can really slow a fishing day down if you're having to retie leaders over and over and over again. For those of you guys that struggle with your leader knots, I'm going to be doing an FG knot later this week, so that's going to be something you're going to want to stay tuned for, because as much of a pain in the butt an FG is to tie, I never have to retie my leader when I break something off. It always breaks off at my drop shot knot, which is what yours should be doing. So if it's not, be prepared for that, because that's going to be a video you don't want to miss. So with the rod and the reel, I also pair that with braid to a fluorocarbon leader. I know I talked about the leader length, but one thing you don't want to overlook is that I always use braid to a leader. I don't ever like to run straight fluorocarbon. You get too much line twist and not enough of a direct connection. The only reason they used to run fluorocarbon straight was because they had really stiff rods, and now we don't. And so you can run that braid to a fluorocarbon leader and it just sets up a whole lot better for you. Now I have 2 different rods that I like to fish this for. I pair that both with one reel. I use a 3000 series reel because it has a bigger spool diameter, allows me to pick up line faster for if those smallmouth are going crazy or if I'm trying to get any fish out of cover. That's really, really important. It also allows you to have a smoother drag system, so that way it's a bigger diameter so the drag comes off smoother. Now the 2 rods that I like to use is an Arc Invoker Pro 610 medium fast, and that is more of a parabolic bend rod, and that is more when I'm reaching for when I go for smallmouth. But it also depends on how you set the hook, which is what I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And so that parabolic bend rod is something that I like for smallmouth because they have a lot of vicious head shakes. They're always going airborne, and so that allows me to cushion that leader, because most oftentimes we're running 6 to 10 pound leader diameter, you know, as far as pound test line goes. So the other rod that I run is a 7-1 medium heavy Arc Essence spinning rod. And what I really like that one for is when I'm going for more largemouth, because it still has a nice bend to it, but it's a little bit stiffer. And so it allows me to drive that hook home when I'm using like that EWG hook or that light wire worm hook. And so those largemouth don't really fight as hard most of the time, and so I don't have to worry about them doing anything crazy. And if I'm fishing for largemouth with a drop shot, most oftentimes it's around cover or in grass, both of which I'm going to need some horsepower to get them out of there. So that's why I like to get them out of there with that little bit bigger rod, because it just allows me to get a better hook set on them and power drive them out of there. Now, what I was alluding to with the hook set is if you set the hook like a southern guy, or want a drop shot where you like slackline them, you might want to go to a flimsier rod even if you're drop shot fishing for largemouth, because you're going to break fish off on the hook set. Now, if you're a guy that likes to reel into them and lean, which is ideally what I like to do, then you can get away with a little bit stiffer rod because you're obviously not utilizing the full parabolic bend to that. So you just have to pay attention with how you like to set the hook and then adjust your rod according to that. So after all of this, a drop shot is always on my deck 365 days a year, no matter if I'm on Florida, California, Mississippi, or up here on Erie. It doesn't matter. It's always a tool that I have in my arsenal. Another tool that I always like to have in my arsenal is going to be a Ned rig. And so if you like this video and you want to learn a little bit more, I have a Ned rig masterclass video up here that I'm going to link you guys to that I really think you should check out, because these pair super, super well together and they're just some great finesse techniques. So thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button to follow along with the content. But God bless, and I'll see you guys in the next video.